There's a common belief that the loudest voice in the room is the most powerful, that if you're silent, you're weak. But the truth is, silence, when used correctly, is one of the greatest tools of leadership, influence, and wisdom. Let me ask you this. How many times have you spoken out of anger, only to regret it moments later? How many times have you rushed to respond, only to realize you didn't have the full picture? The heat of the moment is rarely the right time to speak. In anger, we say things we don't mean. In frustration, we speak without clarity. And in fear, we make promises we can't keep. Silence in these moments isn't avoidance, it's discipline. It's the ability to pause, take a breath, and respond with intention rather than impulse. In today's world, we're pressured to react instantly. But how often do we really stop to think? When you don't have all the facts, speaking too soon can make you seem uninformed or worse, reckless. The strongest leaders listen more than they speak. They gather information before making their move. They understand that silence in the short term leads to wisdom in the long run. Ever argued with someone who had already made up their mind? It's exhausting and it's pointless. There are moments where words won't shift reality. Instead of talking endlessly, take action. Show, don't tell. Let your results be your voice. Not every conversation is a two-way street. Sometimes people aren't listening. They're just waiting to talk. Instead of trying to convince them, try silence. Let them speak. Let them hear themselves. Often they'll realize their own mistakes without you ever needing to say a word. Silence isn't passive. It's powerful. It's a tool for clarity, strength, and influence. The greatest communicators in the world don't speak all the time. They listen, they observe, and when they do speak, their words carry weight. So the next time you're tempted to react instantly, pause. Stay silent, see what happens. You might just find that silence speaks louder than anything you could ever say. Silence is often misunderstood. People associate it with weakness, indecisiveness, or a lack of confidence, but in reality, silence is a powerful tool, one that requires strength, self-awareness, and emotional intelligence. It is a strategy, not a surrender. When used intentionally, silence can shift conversations, shape perceptions, and strengthen leadership. Think about the last time you were in a heated discussion. Maybe it was with a friend, a colleague, or even a stranger. Your heart was pounding, words were rushing to the tip of your tongue, eager to escape. But what if, instead of speaking, you paused? What if, instead of jumping into the emotional chaos, you simply stayed silent? This isn't about avoiding confrontation, it's about mastering it. Silence creates space to think, to observe, to listen. It forces the other person to reveal more than they intended. In that space, power shifts. The one who can control their response, who can resist the urge to speak too soon, is the one who ultimately controls the conversation. Consider how often people regret words spoken in the heat of the moment. How many friendships have been strained because of things said in anger? How many opportunities have been lost because of impulsive words? The ability to stay silent in moments of emotional intensity is not about repressing feelings. It's about ensuring that what you do say carries real weight. In high-pressure situations, people often believe they must fill every gap with words. Silence makes them uncomfortable. But great leaders, great negotiators, and great thinkers understand that silence is not empty, it is full of meaning. It signals confidence, patience, and control. It tells the world that you are not desperate to prove yourself, that you are secure enough to wait. Imagine you're in a business meeting and a heated debate unfolds. One person is arguing passionately, raising their voice, trying to dominate the discussion. But then there is someone else. Someone who listens intently, takes a breath, and remains silent as others rush to speak. When that person finally speaks, the room falls silent. Why? Because their words are rare, deliberate, and intentional. People pay attention when they know you do not waste words. This is the power of strategic silence. It builds anticipation. It demands attention. It creates an aura of confidence and wisdom. When you speak too often, your words lose their impact. When you choose silence wisely, your words gain weight. It's not just in business or leadership where silence is a strength. Think about personal relationships. In arguments with loved ones, the instinct to defend ourselves is strong. We want to explain, justify, and prove our point. But what happens when we resist that urge? When instead of arguing back, we take a moment to pause? That silence shifts the dynamic. It prevents escalation. It forces both people to reflect rather than react. Silence also creates clarity. Have you ever regretted something you said in an emotional moment? That's because emotions often hijack our ability to think clearly. Words spoken in anger or frustration are rarely our best, but silence gives us time. It allows emotions to settle. It gives us the opportunity to decide whether speaking will help or hurt the situation. In negotiations, silence is a weapon. When you make an offer and then stay silent, the other party feels pressure to respond. They may reveal more than they intended, make concessions, or reconsider their position. The discomfort of silence often drives people to fill it, sometimes to their disadvantage. Master negotiators use this to their advantage. The same applies to leadership. A leader who constantly talks, who feels the need to comment on everything, loses credibility over time. But a leader who speaks only when necessary, who listens more than they talk, commands respect. People listen to them because they know their words are valuable. Even in everyday life, silence has power. Consider the way we experience nature. When we stand before a breathtaking view, we don't feel the need to speak, we simply absorb it. The silence makes it more profound. The same principle applies to conversations. When we allow moments of silence, we create depth. We allow ideas to breathe. Think about history's most powerful speeches. They are not just about the words spoken. They are about the pauses, the moments of silence that make those words resonate. Great speakers understand that silence is not the absence of communication. It is a form of communication in itself. But silence isn't just about knowing when to hold back. It's about recognizing that not every moment requires a response. Not every argument needs to be won. Not every criticism needs to be answered. There is strength in restraint. There is wisdom in choosing battles wisely. When we learn to stay silent in critical moments, we gain control over ourselves and the situation. We become more thoughtful, more strategic, and more impactful. The next time you find yourself in a moment of tension, pause. Resist the urge to react. Let the silence do the work. You may be surprised at the power it holds. There is a fundamental difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is immediate, impulsive, and often driven by emotion. Responding, on the other hand, is intentional, measured, and thoughtful. When emotions run high, it is easy to react, to say the first thing that comes to mind, to defend ourselves, to argue, to lash out. But in most cases, the words we speak in moments of emotional intensity are not our best. They are driven by frustration, anger, fear, or hurt, and they often do more damage than good. Imagine a moment when someone criticized you unfairly. Maybe it was a coworker undermining your efforts, a friend making an offhand remark, or a stranger being rude. The instinct in such situations is to react instantly, to push back, to correct them, to defend yourself. But have you ever noticed that when you react immediately, the situation often escalates? Words stack upon words, and before you know it, a minor issue has turned into a full-blown conflict. Now imagine if instead of reacting, you took a breath and stayed silent. What happens then? The other person, expecting a heated response, is often caught off guard. That silence shifts the power dynamic. It forces them to sit with their own words, to reflect, to possibly even soften their stance. When emotions take over, our ability to think clearly is compromised. Science backs this up. The brain's amygdala, responsible for processing emotions like fear and anger, often hijacks rational thinking in high-stress moments. This is why we say things we later regret, why we make decisions that seem irrational in hindsight. But when we pause, when we allow silence to settle in, we give our rational mind time to catch up. We give ourselves the space to assess whether what we are about to say will help or harm the situation. The most effective communicators are not those who always have a quick response, but those who know when to stay silent. Think about the best leaders you've encountered. They don't rush to respond in moments of tension. Instead, they take their time. They let others speak. They let emotions settle. And when they finally do speak, their words carry weight. This is because silence creates space for wisdom. When we react instantly, we rely on instinct rather than insight. But when we pause, we allow clarity to emerge. In personal relationships, this skill is invaluable. Arguments between partners, friends, or family members often spiral because both sides react without thinking. One person raises their voice, the other follows suit. One makes an accusation, the other defends. Before long, the argument is no longer about the original issue, it becomes a battle of emotions. But what if, in that moment of tension, one person simply stayed silent? What if they took a breath instead of immediately reacting? That silence can de-escalate the situation. It creates a pause that allows both people to reflect rather than attack. It prevents words from being said that cannot be taken back. In professional settings, this principle is equally powerful. Imagine a high-stakes negotiation. One party makes an aggressive demand. The other, instead of reacting defensively, remains silent for a moment. That silence creates discomfort for the opposing side. It forces them to wonder what the other person is thinking. It gives them space to reconsider their position. Silence, in this case, becomes a strategic tool. It is not weakness, it is control. There is also a deeper level to this. Sometimes silence is not just about preventing a bad reaction, it is about creating a better response. When we pause before speaking, we give ourselves the chance to choose words that will actually move the situation forward. Instead of saying something we will regret, we can ask a clarifying question. Instead of defending ourselves, we can acknowledge the other person's perspective. Instead of escalating conflict, we can guide the conversation toward resolution. The greatest leaders, negotiators, and communicators are not those who always have the fastest response. They are those who have the most thoughtful response. And thoughtful responses require silence. They require us to step back from the emotional heat of the moment and consider what really needs to be said. This applies not only to conflicts, but also to everyday conversations. Too often, we listen to respond rather than to understand. We hear the first part of someone's sentence and immediately start formulating our reply. In doing so, we miss crucial details. But when we practice silence, when we truly listen, we gain a deeper understanding of the other person. We pick up on their emotions, their hesitations, the things left unsaid. And this allows us to respond in a way that is far more meaningful than a rushed reaction. Think about the last time you had a conversation with someone who truly listened to you. Not someone who was waiting for their turn to speak, but someone who gave you their full attention, who let silence fill the space instead of rushing to reply. How did that feel? It probably made you feel valued, respected, understood. That is the power of silence. It allows us to connect with others on a deeper level, to build trust, to communicate with authenticity. But silence is not easy. It requires patience. It requires self-control. It requires the ability to sit with discomfort rather than trying to immediately fix it with words. It is a skill that takes practice. But once mastered, it changes the way we interact with the world. The next time you feel the urge to react instantly, pause. Stay silent for just a few seconds longer than feels comfortable. Notice what happens. Notice how the energy of the conversation shifts. Notice how clarity begins to emerge. In that silence, you will find your greatest strength. Silence is often misunderstood as emptiness, but in reality is one of the most powerful tools of observation. In a world where everyone is eager to speak, few take the time to truly listen and observe. But those who do, those who master the art of silence, see what others miss. They notice the subtle shifts in tone, the hesitation in someone's voice, the slight change in body language. They pick up on unspoken emotions, on the things left unsaid, and in doing so, they gain an advantage in communication, decision-making, and leadership. When we stay silent, we give ourselves permission to take in more information. Instead of focusing on what we are going to say next, we focus on what is happening in front of us. We begin to see patterns that others overlook. We start to understand people on a deeper level, not just based on their words, but based on their actions. Observation is not just about looking, it is about perceiving, about making sense of the details that are often ignored. Think about a time when you walked into a room filled with people. Most of us immediately engage in conversation, eager to participate, to be seen, to be heard. But if you take a step back and simply observe, you start to notice things you wouldn't have otherwise. You see who is comfortable and who is nervous. You notice who is leading the discussion and who is holding back. You recognize who is being genuine and who is putting on a front. All of this information is available to us all the time, but most people miss it because they are too busy talking. Great leaders understand this. They know that speaking less and listening more gives them insight into their team, their competition, and their environment. They don't rush to fill every silence with words. Instead, they let others reveal themselves. They allow people to speak freely without interruption, and in doing so, they gain a deeper understanding of their motivations, fears, and desires. In negotiations, silence is a strategic weapon. When one party makes an offer and the other remains silent, that silence creates pressure. The person who spoke first begins to second-guess themselves. Did they ask for too much? Did they reveal too much? The discomfort of silence often makes people reveal more than they intended. This is why skilled negotiators do not rush to respond. They let silence work for them. They watch, they listen, they gather information before making their move. But observation is not just about business or leadership. It is essential in personal relationships as well. Have you ever had a conversation where someone's words didn't quite match their tone? Maybe they said they were fine, but something about their expression told a different story. If we're too quick to take words at face value, we miss these deeper truths. But if we stay silent, if we listen not just to words, but to the way they are spoken, we begin to understand people in a way that words alone cannot convey. Think about how much can be communicated without words. A sigh, a pause, a slight shift in body language, all of these reveal emotions that words often hide. When we rush to speak, we overlook these signals. But when we practice silence, when we allow space for observation, we begin to understand people more deeply. We become more empathetic, more attuned to the needs of others. Silence also allows us to observe ourselves. When we are constantly talking, we don't give ourselves time to reflect. But in silence, we can notice our own thoughts, our own reactions, our own emotions. We begin to see our patterns, how we respond to stress, how we handle conflict, how we process information. Self-awareness is impossible without observation, and observation is impossible without silence. In moments of conflict, staying silent gives us the ability to see the bigger picture. When emotions run high, people often focus only on their own perspective. They are so eager to prove their point that they stop listening. But if we choose to stay silent, we gain an advantage. We hear everything the other person is saying. We see the weaknesses in their argument. We notice what is driving their frustration. And instead of reacting emotionally, we can respond with clarity and intention. Silence also reveals the true intentions of others. When you don't rush to fill a conversation with your own thoughts, you give people the space to reveal who they really are. Some will fill the silence with honesty, while others will expose their insecurities. Some will try to manipulate, while others will show their sincerity. The more you observe, the more you understand who you can trust and who you cannot. Even in everyday life, the ability to observe through silence is invaluable. Imagine being in a meeting where everyone is debating an issue. Most people are focused on getting their point across, but the person who sits back and listens gains something different. They notice which arguments hold weight and which do not. They recognize who is being defensive and who is being constructive. And when they finally do speak, they do so with the full picture in mind. This is why some of the most respected leaders, thinkers, and decision makers are not the ones who talk the most. They are the ones who speak with purpose. They are the ones who take the time to observe before they act. They understand that silence is not a lack of participation. It is a different kind of participation, one that allows for deeper understanding and smarter choices. But observation requires patience. In a world that values quick responses and instant reactions, staying silent can feel unnatural. We are conditioned to believe that participation means speaking up, but true participation begins with listening. It begins with watching, with taking in information before deciding how to contribute. This is not to say that silence is always the answer. There are times when we must speak, when we must take action. But the difference between a good response and a great response is often the time we take to observe before speaking. The more we practice this, the more we realize how much we have been missing. So the next time you are in a conversation, in a meeting, in a negotiation, or even in an argument, try this. Stay silent a little longer than feels natural. Observe before you speak. Listen for the things that are not being said. Notice the emotions behind the words. Watch for the small details that others overlook. In that silence, you will find the truth. And in finding the truth, you will gain the power to respond rather than react. There are moments in life where no matter how much we say, how passionately we argue, or how clearly we express our perspective, words simply won't change the outcome. It's a difficult truth to accept because human nature drives us to believe that if we just explain ourselves better, if we just push a little harder, we can make people see things our way. But reality doesn't always work like that. There are times when silence is the only move that truly holds power. Think about a time when you're in a heated argument, maybe with a friend, a family member, or a colleague. You laid out every fact, every logical point, every reason why your perspective made sense. And yet, nothing changed. They held their position firmly, unwilling to shift, no matter what you said. The frustration builds. The more you try to explain, the more resistance you meet. And then it hits you. No matter what words you use, the outcome has already been decided. This is where silence becomes powerful. When words won't change the outcome, the best response is often no response at all. Silence is not passive, it's strategic. It is a decision to stop pouring energy into something that will not shift, to recognize that some battles are not worth fighting with words. Instead, action, patience, or simply walking away becomes the better choice. Imagine a negotiation where the other party has already made up their mind. They are unwilling to budge no matter how compelling your argument may be. If you keep pushing, you come across as desperate, as though you need them to agree. But if you simply stay silent, something interesting happens. The other party begins to feel the weight of that silence. They expect resistance, a counter-argument, a plea, but instead, they get nothing. That silence unsettles them. It forces them to reconsider. This happens in everyday conversations too. Have you ever noticed that when someone is trying to provoke you, expecting an angry response, silence throws them off balance? They want you to react, to engage, to fight back, but when you don't, when you simply stay silent, they don't know what to do with that. Their own words linger in the air with no opposition to push against. They either rethink what they've said or they move on. There's also another layer to this. Not every situation requires an explanation. When we constantly explain ourselves, we give away power. If someone has already decided what they believe about you, no amount of words will change their mind. Some people don't want to understand, they just want to argue. And the best way to win an argument with someone who refuses to listen is not to have the argument at all. Silence in these moments is not surrender, it is strength. It says, I do not need to prove myself to you. It communicates self-assurance in a way that words never could. The people who are truly confident in their position do not feel the need to convince everyone of it. They simply act according to their principles and let their actions speak for themselves. History has shown this time and time again. Some of the most powerful moments in leadership, in movements and revolutions have not been shaped by words, but by silence. A leader choosing not to respond to an insult, refusing to engage in meaningless debate, staying silent in the face of provocation, these are acts of control, not weakness. In our personal lives, this principle is just as valuable. There will be times when people try to get a reaction out of you. Maybe they want to test your patience, maybe they want to undermine you, or maybe they simply thrive on drama. But when you don't give them what they want, when you choose silence instead, you take away their power. They cannot argue with someone who refuses to engage. They cannot manipulate someone who does not respond. This applies to criticism as well. Not every negative comment deserves an answer. Sometimes silence is the best way to show that their words have no effect. If someone insults you and you react, you validate their attempt to get under your skin. But if you remain silent, if you refuse to acknowledge their words, they lose their impact. There's also a deeper psychological effect at play here. When you stop speaking, you force others to fill the silence. And often, in doing so, they reveal more than they intended. In arguments, people expect resistance. When they don't get it, they start to second-guess themselves. Maybe they become uncomfortable. Maybe they start to over-explain, or maybe they begin to realize that their position isn't as strong as they thought. Silence forces people to confront their own thoughts without the distraction of a counter-argument. In decision-making, silence is just as powerful. When you are faced with a situation where words won't change the outcome, stepping back and observing instead of reacting can give you the clarity you need. Instead of trying to force a solution, you allow time to reveal what needs to happen next. Many of the best decisions are not made in moments of heated debate, but in quiet reflection afterward. Silence also commands respect. People take notice when someone who could speak chooses not to. It signals confidence, self-control, and an understanding that not every battle is worth fighting with words. There is a reason why the most respected individuals in any field are not the ones who talk the most. They are the ones who speak when it matters. Think about the way athletes, performers, or business leaders handle high-pressure moments. The ones who succeed are not the ones who constantly defend themselves or engage in unnecessary arguments. They're the ones who stay focused, who let their results speak louder than their words. The ones who waste energy trying to explain themselves to every critic, to every doubter, are the ones who burn out. In the end, silence is not about giving up. It is about knowing when words are not the solution. It is about choosing where to place your energy, where to invest your time, and where to simply let things be. There will always be moments where speaking up is necessary, where standing your ground requires words. But there will also be moments where the wisest thing you can do is say nothing at all. So the next time you find yourself in a situation where words won't change the outcome, resist the urge to speak just for the sake of speaking. Instead, embrace the power of silence. Let it work for you. Let it create space, shift dynamics, and reveal the truth. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is the one left unspoken. Silence is often mistaken for weakness, but in reality, it is one of the greatest demonstrations of self-control. The ability to stay silent when provoked, insulted, or challenged is not an act of surrender. It is an act of mastery. It means choosing not to be controlled by impulse, by ego, or by the need to have the last word. It is the discipline of knowing that not every situation requires a response. Not every battle is worth fighting, and not every insult deserves attention. There is a moment between stimulus and response, a brief window in which we have the power to decide our reaction. Most people don't take advantage of this moment. They react immediately without thinking, driven by emotion rather than reason. But those who practice self-control recognize the power of the pause. They allow that moment to stretch, to widen, creating space between what happens to them and how they choose to respond. In that space, they find clarity. Think about a time when someone said something that triggered you. Maybe it was an unfair criticism, a personal attack, or an attempt to provoke you. What was your instinct? Most likely you felt the immediate urge to defend yourself, to correct them, to fight back. But if you had waited, if you had stayed silent instead, how might the situation have played out differently? Would responding have changed their mind? Would it have improved the outcome, or would it have only escalated the situation further? When we respond immediately, we give away control. We let others dictate our emotions, our actions, our words. But when we practice silence, we reclaim that control. We show that we are not easily swayed, that we are not at the mercy of every comment, every insult, every challenge thrown our way. This is not about being indifferent. It is about being intentional. It is about recognizing that some reactions serve no purpose other than to feed conflict, to stroke egos, or to fuel negativity. There is incredible strength in restraint. The greatest leaders, thinkers, and influencers throughout history have understood this. They do not engage in every argument. They do not allow themselves to be baited by criticism. They do not feel the need to constantly explain themselves. Instead, they choose their words carefully, and when necessary, they choose silence. Their power comes not from saying the most, but from saying only what truly matters. Consider how this applies in personal relationships. In moments of disagreement, silence can prevent unnecessary damage. Often, in the heat of an argument, we say things we don't mean, things driven by frustration rather than truth. And once those words are spoken, they cannot be taken back. But when we practice self-control, when we hold back from reacting impulsively, we prevent this damage before it happens. We allow ourselves time to cool down, to reflect, to choose our words wisely rather than recklessly. This is not about suppressing emotions. It is about directing them wisely. There is a difference between bottling up frustration and choosing when and how to express it. Silence is not about avoidance. It is about strategy. It is about ensuring that when we do speak, our words carry weight, that they serve a purpose rather than simply being an outlet for fleeting emotions. In professional settings, this discipline is invaluable. The ability to stay silent when provoked or challenged can mean the difference between success and failure. Imagine being in a meeting where someone makes a passive-aggressive remark toward you. Your instinct may be to defend yourself immediately, to prove them wrong. But what if instead you remained silent? What if you let their words hang in the air, unchallenged? In many cases, their own words will work against them. Without a reaction to fuel them, their remark loses its power. People often expect resistance. When they don't get it, they become uncertain. They start to doubt themselves. They wonder if they have overstepped, if they have made a mistake. Silence can make people uncomfortable, and in that discomfort, they often reveal more than they intended. They start explaining, justifying, backtracking, all without you having to say a word. This is also true in negotiations. A well-timed silence can shift the balance of power. When you make an offer and then stay silent, the other party often feels pressure to respond, sometimes in ways that work in your favor. Silence forces them to think, to question, to reconsider. It gives you control over the pace of the conversation, allowing you to dictate the rhythm rather than being pulled into someone else's urgency. Self-control is not just about holding back words, it is about holding back actions as well. When we learn to manage our reactions, we make better decisions. We avoid unnecessary conflicts. We maintain our composure in stressful situations, and we keep our focus on what truly matters. The people who thrive are not the ones who react to every challenge. They are the ones who stay steady, who move with purpose rather than impulse. This level of discipline is not easy. It requires patience, it requires awareness, it requires the ability to sit with discomfort rather than immediately trying to resolve it through words. But once mastered, it becomes one of the most powerful tools we have. It changes the way we navigate relationships, challenges, and high-pressure situations. There is a reason why the wisest individuals in any field are often the ones who speak the least. They are listening, they are observing, they are thinking, and when they do speak, their words matter. They are not speaking just to be heard. They are speaking to make an impact. This is the essence of self-control. It is not about silence for the sake of silence. It is about silence for the sake of power, for the sake of clarity, for the sake of choosing when and how to engage. It is about understanding that we do not have to attend every argument we are invited to, that we do not have to respond to every challenge thrown our way. The next time you feel the urge to react immediately, pause, take a breath, stay silent. Ask yourself, will my words change the outcome? Will speaking serve a purpose, or will it only serve my ego? In that moment of reflection, you will find strength, you will find clarity, and you will find that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all.